9 seconds. That's all it took for Brayden Caldwell to destroy himself. A failed handshake caught on camera shared millions of times and spiraling rapidly out of control. But what Brayden didn't know was this, that single act wasn't just a sign of prejudice. It was the trigger for a plan that had been quietly in the making for over 2 decades. Behind Malcolm Ainsley's calm exterior was a masterfully constructed blueprint born from old wounds. His father's wrongful conviction, the family fortune stolen, a career shattered, all tied to one name, Caldwell Dominion, and now he was back. The grand ballroom of the Halcyon Grand Hotel hosting the Future Front 2025 Summit had become the epicenter of the global financial world, under sparkling crystal chandeliers and a low hum of anticipation. 300 of the world's top investors waited to witness what Brayden Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Dominion, had promised would be a deal that would shake the future. With perfectly combed silver hair and a meticulously tailored suit, Brayden stepped onto the stage like a man born into power. He raised a hand signaling for silence and then spoke, his voice deep, smooth, and polished by thousands of public appearances. Today, Caldwell Dominion is not just announcing a new partnership. We are rewriting the rules of the entire financial industry. The applause erupted on cue. As if programmed investors nodded approvingly, cameras clicked into action. Then Brayden continued, "Allow me to introduce our newest strategic partner, the man behind the silent investment funds that have quietly stirred global markets, Malcolm Ainsley." The spotlight swung around. Malcolm stepped out from the wings. No bodyguards, no name tag, no flash. Just a man in a simple gray suit, sharp eyes, and a steady stride. The crowd murmured. Some snapped photos in haste. Others Googled the name. Malcolm walked to the center of the stage and extended his hand. A formal handshake, a silent test. Brayden looked at the hand, and then he turned away, pretending to adjust the microphone. Malcolm's hand lingered suspended midair. A few whispers rippled from the back rows. The cameras held still for a few seconds longer. That moment, those 4 seconds, were enough to set an entire empire on fire. That night, the video clip, trimmed straight from the conference's live stream, went viral across social media. It's 2025 and we're still dealing with this kind of elitism. Who is Malcolm Ainsley, and why was Brayden so afraid to shake his hand? A young reporter from the New Avalon Times posted an article with a simple cutting headline, "The $3 billion handshake that never happened." And while the media swirled with debates, breakdowns, and speculation, only one person smiled as he rewatched the clip, Malcolm Ainsley. In a penthouse on the 60th floor overlooking the city of New Avalon, Malcolm quietly closed his laptop. On the table sat a dark leather briefcase, inside a thick dossier stamped with the words, "Phoenix Protocol, Confidential." It was the plan he had crafted back in 2004 after his father, Tobias Ainsley, was wrongfully convicted in a case orchestrated by none other than Brayden Caldwell in the Caldwell Dominion empire. Back then, Malcolm had only been a college student. The day his father was led away in handcuffs was the day he made a vow to reclaim everything, not with force, but with intellect and precision. Step by step, he built his own investment empire in silence. He forged a global web of influence, quietly acquiring the critical links in Caldwell Dominion's infrastructure, all without them noticing. And today, with one refused handshake, the game had officially begun. Elsewhere in the city, Celeste Monroe, Caldwell Dominion's director of internal communications, received a message from an unknown number, Phase 1 activated, MNT. She had known this moment would come. She just didn't expect it to come this soon. Brayden Caldwell thought he was in control of everything. But what he didn't know was that the man he dismissed on stage was the very one who had designed the entire chessboard. He was now standing in the middle of. The next chapter wouldn't just be about business, it would be about justice and truth. 300 people, all among the most powerful figures in global finance. With a single nod, they could plunge a nation into crisis or catapult a nameless startup into unicorn status, and among them was a man no one noticed. No one recognized the man in the dark suit wearing a vintage watch, No name tag, no bodyguards, no corporate insignia, only a steady gaze, calm presence, and purposeful steps. Enough to make the hotel security staff at the Halcyon Grand instinctively straighten up as he walked past. Identification, sir, the ID officer asked cautiously, eyes scanning the facial recognition monitor. The man gave a faint smile. Malcolm Ainsley. Within seconds, the guard's expression changed. The screen lit up with encrypted financial files and a priority classification tagged with a government-level code. My apologies, Mr. Ainsley. Please go right in. I didn't realize. It's all right, Malcolm interrupted gently. I'm used to not being recognized. He stepped into the grand lobby where the Future Front 2025 Investment Summit was in full swing. Crystal lights blazed overhead. The air was thick with luxury colognes and the cool confidence of the elite. Everyone's eyes were locked on the stage where Brayden Caldwell stood greeting the crowd like a modern-day emperor. No one turned around. No one realized that the man who had just entered silently controlled over 71 satellite financial firms, held veto power in 4 of the world's 10 largest investment funds, and had been the invisible hand behind the rise or collapse of countless economic empires over the past 2 decades. No one knew Malcolm Ainsley was the specter, the name whispered by financial media in vain, because no one had ever been able to confirm who he really was. No one, except a very select few. Elsewhere in the same building in a control room, where technicians were managing the internal broadcast stream, Celeste Monroe ran a final check on the camera feeds. As Caldwell Dominion's Director of Internal Communications, she had access to nearly every data system in the company, something she had been quietly taking advantage of for the past 3 years. A message lit up on her phone screen. He's in security, didn't suspect a thing. Tobias Celeste typed back, Camera 7. Slow down the handshake moment. Add a 2-second delay to the social feed. We need that moment to become iconic. She took a deep breath. This wasn't just a PR operation. It was a takedown of an empire that had swallowed the entire industry whole. On the top floor of the hotel, in a quiet room surrounded by bulletproof glass, Tobias Wynn, a seasoned legal advisor and Malcolm's closest friend, was watching the conference live stream across 7 monitors simultaneously. When was the last time he made a public appearance? One assistant asked, unable to hide her curiosity. 2008. Tobias replied without taking his eyes off the screens, at a summit in Dubai. But he used a different name back then, Supifirm. He quietly pulled a classified file from the briefcase beside him. Inside were dozens of pages, leaked internal memos, masked contracts, complex ownership charts connecting shell companies across Panama, the BVI, Luxembourg, and Tokyo. Every path led to the same name, Brayden Caldwell. Malcolm had been tracking him for 20 years, not for revenge, but to make sure justice was no longer hidden behind power. Back in the grand hall, Malcolm stood quietly among the crowd, his eyes fixed on Brayden. The man was speaking about sustainable innovation, multidimensional partnerships, and growth aligned with social responsibility. The words were polished, carefully rehearsed, but they lacked one thing: authenticity. Each time Brayden said diversity, Malcolm glanced at Celeste standing tensely near the main camera. Each time he mentioned collaboration, Malcolm recalled the image of his father, a black inventor, being destroyed by the very system Brayden now represented. Caldwell Dominion had stolen his patent, framed him for fraud, and sent him to prison, all under the silent approval of the legal world and the press. From that moment on, Malcolm disappeared from every public record, but he never disappeared from the world. And now, Brayden said on stage, his smile icy, Caldwell Dominion is proud to introduce our newest strategic partner, a brilliant financial mind, a man who has joined us in ushering in the era of Finance 4.0. Please welcome Malcolm Ainsley. The applause erupted like a gunshot. Malcolm walked onto the stage, slow, steady, composed. Brayden stepped forward but didn't extend his hand. Instead, he angled slightly to the side, adjusting the microphone, as if the outstretched hand in front of him didn't exist. And just like that, the handshake never happened. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The camera captured everything. Malcolm's hands suspended midair, Brayden's indifferent expression, and a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Just minutes later, the clip hit the internet. Within 24 hours, it had exploded across social media. Headlines began to appear. CEO refuses to shake hands with black billionaire. Prejudice or a power play. Backfiring. The moment that shook Future Front 2025. Caldwell just created the greatest enemy in the company's history. High above Tobias allowed himself a slight smile. Welcome to the real game. Brayden. Meanwhile, in the control room, Celeste spun her chair toward the camera monitors. Scene 3. Slow it down, add a sharp inhale, boost the light contrast. She hit a button, send the clip to the 12 influencer accounts waiting for the signal. As for Malcolm, as he stepped down from the stage, he said nothing. He simply took out his phone and typed a single message to Tobias. Activate Phase 1. From the top floor of an unnamed high-rise in New Avalon, Malcolm Ainsley stood silently watching the skyline fade into the night. Beneath the blinking city lights, he didn't see serenity. He saw the symptoms of a world unraveling, driven by greed. To his right, a laptop screen glowed softly, displaying the codename of the Operation Phoenix Protocol, a plan conceived 2 decades ago, and now it was time to bring it to life. Malcolm no longer needed to wait. The refused handshake at the Future Front 2025 summit wasn't just an insult. It was the perfect trigger. The moment to launch the strategy he and Tobias Wynn had spent years perfecting. He pulled out his phone, opened an encrypted app, and typed a single line, Phase 1 go. In a law office at the heart of New Avalon, Tobias Wynn received the signal. He didn't need to ask a thing. The moment he read the message, he stood up, grabbed the pre-packed briefcase beside his desk. Inside legal filings, financial dossiers, and a list of high-level strategic contacts, Tobias was discreet but lethal in execution. A longtime friend of Malcolm's, he had once been a federal prosecutor, until he walked away disillusioned by the rot inside the system. Since then, he'd quietly aided Malcolm in building a shadow network of influence, informal but formidable. Now he was the legal architect behind Phoenix Protocol, a plan to expose and dismantle the corruption rooted deep within Caldwell Dominion. Tobias stepped into a conference room where his inner circle of operatives waited. A digital map flickered to life on the projector screen, red markers pinpointing the coordinated targets. Media blitzes, forensic audits, and legal actions. Each one represented a critical node in the empire Brayden Caldwell had spent a lifetime constructing. Tonight, Tobias declared, we make Caldwell Dominion feel the ground shake beneath them. Meanwhile, at Caldwell Dominion headquarters, Celeste Monroe was typing nonstop. As Director of Internal Communications, Celeste knew the company's inner workings down to the last detail. But what few people knew was that she was also a mole. Someone Malcolm had quietly approached 7 years ago, patiently earning her trust. Celeste had seen enough of Brayden Caldwell's deception. She had once been paraded as a model of female success, the poster face of the company's equality and sustainability campaigns. But the deeper she went, the more she realized it was all a glittering fade, a polished mask hiding a system rotten to the core. She received an email with a single subject line, Confirm Phase 1 prepared. Below it was an encrypted link leading to a dossier Tobias had prepared, the folder named Dominion Collapse MSRM. Inside were hundreds of files, detailed records of financial manipulation, falsified environmental reports, and lists of individuals who had been silenced to preserve Caldwell's image. She selected 3 key files. 1. An internal document canceling budget allocations for black-led startups. 2. A spreadsheet showing the environmental fund had been laundered through a Panama-based shell company. 3. An audio recording of Brayden casually instructing the head of HR to fire employees who don't fit the company culture. Celeste transferred them to an encrypted drive and locked it inside her personal safe. The first phase of the campaign needed irrefutable evidence, and she knew what she held could blow apart the carefully constructed illusion Caldwell had spent years manufacturing. The next morning, an unexpected exclusive appeared on the front page of the New Avalon Tribune. Beneath the headline, Caldwell, Dominion Green Empire or Grand Illusion, were the first revelations about discrepancies in the corporation's ESG reports. The article quoted an anonymous source, supplied by Tobias, who claimed that Caldwell had deliberately altered emissions data to hide the fact that the company was polluting at 3 times the level it had publicly committed to. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire across global financial platforms. Caldwell's stock began to dip slightly. No one in the executive boardroom could explain how this information had leaked, especially not now on the eve of a major funding round. But this was only the beginning. That evening, Tobias slipped into an elite private club where Walter Gentry, Caldwell's PR chief, was holding a discreet meeting with a journalist attempting to steer the narrative. Tobias didn't approach him directly. He didn't have to. He had already planted a recording device earlier. The resulting conversation, filled with manipulation and strategic deceit, would become the next weapon in a carefully staged media offensive. Meanwhile, a wave of lawsuits hit Caldwell Dominion. Law firms across Asia, Europe, and South America, quietly hired by Malcolm over the past year, simultaneously filed legal actions against the company. Charges included unfair competition, market destabilization, and violations of anti-monopoly laws. Brayden won't even know what hit him. Tobias said over the phone to Malcolm, "Every strike is legally sound, and the media is ready to amplify it." Back at his private residence, Malcolm stood silently before a framed photo of his father, a man once destroyed by the very system Brayden had helped build. He poured himself a glass of water. No alcohol, no celebration. The game was far from over, but that night the city of New Avalon had no idea that a war for justice, for truth and for redemption had already begun. Phase 1 activated. Celeste Monroe, the traitor in the shadows. That night, Celeste didn't go home. She began living off the grid. Her personal phone was stripped of its battery. Her laptop ran only on encrypted anonymous networks. The temporary apartment she stayed in was on the upper floor of a worn-down building. No security cameras, no smart doorbells, no trace. Minute by minute, second by second, Celeste knew she was now part of a game where every move could make her disappear, without a trace, without a reason. And yet in that darkness, she felt something radiant inside her. She was doing the right thing. During an internal press briefing, live-streamed to Caldwell Dominion branches around the world, Brayden Caldwell took the stage, his expression hard as steel. No one mentioned the handshake, but everyone knew, from the CEO to the security guards. This company is under attack from within. Brayden declared, his eyes sharp as blades sweeping across the room. We will show no mercy to anyone who threatens the reputation and stability of Caldwell Dominion. Celeste watched the broadcast from a triple encrypted laptop in her safe house, and she knew those words were meant for her. That evening, another confidential document was sent out by Celeste. This time, it was a sponsorship contract between Caldwell and a local politician, signed during an election year in exchange for flexibility during environmental audits. Every number, every signature, clear and damning. Tobias Wynn received the file in the middle of a video call with his strategic legal team. He said only one thing: she's not backing down, and neither can we. The next day, Celeste received an email from Caldwell Dominion's HR department with the subject line, "Mandatory Personal Security Review. Response required within 24 hours. It was their way of signaling a purge. She didn't respond. 3 hours later, her access badge was deactivated, her internal accounts were wiped. A few quiet messages trickled in from former colleagues. Just a handful of words. Be careful, someone's looking for you. That night on her way back to the apartment, Celeste noticed the door lock had been subtly tampered with. She didn't go inside. She turned around and walked away, without hesitation. 30 minutes later, from a discreet internet cafe, she messaged Tobias. "They've found me, I can't stay here." Tobias replied with just one line. "Backup plan in motion, address is on the way." In a secure room prearranged by Malcolm Ainsley, Celeste sat in front of a digital board displaying the internal network map of Caldwell Dominion one by one. She began marking names, personnel groups, and sensitive divisions, the places where lies and corruption had spread like mold in a closed room. "Are you sure you want to keep going?" Tobias asked as he stepped in. Celeste nodded. "If I stop now, everything I've risked, everything I've sacrificed would mean nothing." "Hakim," Tobias handed her a red folder. "This is the next target, and after that, phase 3. 3 days later, a series of investigative articles exploded across top financial news outlets. The focus Caldwell Dominion's shadowy overseas real estate investments, backed by leaked internal documents, indisputable and damning. Brayden Caldwell was furious. In an emergency boardroom meeting, he slammed his fist on the table. "We've got a rat in the house. Find it at any cost." But there was one thing Brayden didn't expect. The rat wasn't running. It was dismantling the teeth of his empire one by one from the inside. In an underground parking garage, Celeste met Malcolm in person for the first time in weeks. They had only been communicating through intermediaries. Until now, his face was calm as ever, but his eyes, deep steady, carried the weight of storms. "You can walk away at any time," he said. "I'd understand." Celeste shook her head. Her voice was hoarse but unwavering. "I've lost too much to turn back, and I want to be able to look in the mirror without lowering my eyes." Malcolm gave a small nod. "You're no longer a mole. You're the flame." Isla Caldwell's penthouse in the heart of New Avalon was modern, elegant, and filled with light, much like the woman herself. As Caldwell Dominion's Director of Sustainable Development, Isla had once been the poster child for a new generation of leadership, educated, idealistic, and destined to inherit the billion-dollar legacy of her father, Brayden Caldwell. But lately something had shifted. Ever since the explosive moment at the Future Front Summit, when her father publicly refused to shake Malcolm Ainsley's hand, Isla had begun to feel cracks forming in the pristine image of the family she had always believed in. She had tried to defend her father, tried to believe it was all a misunderstanding. But as the clip spread like wildfire across social media and national broadcasts, something in her father's smile, too calm, too deliberate, planted a seed of doubt. In her office on the 32nd floor of Caldwell headquarters, Isla received an anonymous email sent from an untraceable address. The subject line was just 5 words. "Look closely at Q4 data. Greenbridge doesn't exist." She froze. Greenbridge was the renewable energy initiative she herself had been leading. Or so she thought. Nervous and unsettled, Isla logged into the company's internal archives. After multiple failed password attempts and strange system alerts, she finally reached the original versions of the financial reports. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Greenbridge existed only on paper. The investments that had been proudly announced to the public, over $75 million, had in reality been funneled into shell companies. Those entities were used to acquire small businesses owned by people of color, then quickly dismantled. Their assets were seized, their patents reassigned to Caldwell Dominion. It was a manufactured chain of bankruptcies. And the name Brayden Caldwell appeared in every approval document. Isla was stunned, not just by the lies, but by the horrifying realization that she had unknowingly served as the green face of a campaign built to erase opportunity. Young entrepreneurs, startups that had believed in change, in her, had been exploited, then discarded like trash. She printed the documents. Each page felt like a knife carving away at everything she thought she knew about her father. Then she called him. "I need to see you. I'm in a meeting tonight, maybe." "No, now." In the private dining room of the Caldwell Reserve Club, the usual meeting place between father and daughter, Brayden remained composed, calmly slicing into his steak, his eyes cold and detached, as if watching a stock dip slightly. Isla didn't hesitate. She laid the documents out in front of him. "Do you have anything to say about this?" Brayden glanced at the papers, then smirked. "Greenbridge is marketing all that sustainability talk. It's to build trust. You should know that by now." Isla clenched her fists. "They trusted me, Dad. The entrepreneurs we dismantled, they believed I stood for a fair future. Their mistake was believing in fairness. In this world, the weaker side loses." That sentence shattered whatever illusion she had left. That night, Isla sat in silence on her sofa, surrounded by printed reports, haunted by memories. Memories of a little girl who once looked up to her father like a hero, of the man who had told her in her earliest lessons, "Always stand on the side of what's right, even when it's the harder road. Turns out he never believed in that. Only she did. Then a message came through, sender unknown. Number just one line. You're not alone. We know, let's talk. M. Isla stared at the screen. Malcolm. She knew her father would never stop. To him, truth was the greatest threat, but to her, truth was the only thing she had left. The next day, Isla used her private access code to enter Caldwell Dominion's high-level secure archive, a digital vault reserved exclusively for the company's executive elite. What she discovered next left her stunned. A string of emails between Brayden and a federal judge discussing how to settle a ruling in a case brought by a biotech startup that had accused Caldwell Dominion of patent theft. Within 6 months, the case had been dismissed, the plaintiff company bankrupt. It was the same pattern she had just uncovered. She printed everything. There was no doubt left. Caldwell Dominion wasn't just dominating the market, it was manipulating the law. That evening, Isla met Celeste Monroe at a discreet cafe tucked into the west side of New Avalon. You were the one who sent that first email, weren't you? Isla asked. Celeste nodded. I knew you'd find the truth. Why did you risk so much? Celeste looked her in the eyes. Because Malcolm isn't just an investor, he's a living witness to the damage your father caused. And because if we don't stand up, who will? Isla stared at Celeste, feeling torn between the blood that bound her to a legacy and the justice pulling her toward a reckoning. But now the choice was clearer than ever. I need to meet him. Celeste smiled faintly. He's been waiting for you. That night in a basement room of an old hotel, once the headquarters of an independent press outlet, Isla stepped in and came face to face with Malcolm Ainsley, the man her father had publicly humiliated, the man who now held the fate of the entire Caldwell empire in his hands. Malcolm gave a small nod. Thank you for coming. I came because I can't stay silent anymore. No one blames you for believing in your father. Malcolm said calmly, I once believed in justice. Until your father strangled it. Isla exhaled slowly. Her gaze was steady, more resolute than ever. I'm ready now. Tell me what I need to do. Malcolm nodded again. Then you need to know everything about the past, about the price of silence, and about the war that's only just begun. While the media was still buzzing over the infamous handshake snub, an underground earthquake was quietly set into motion in the financial world. Caldwell Dominion had just lost Neurontech, a key subsidiary specializing in strategic supply chain software. No one knew that Malcolm Ainsley had acquired Neurontech in just 72 hours, using a network of anonymous investment funds based in Switzerland and Singapore. At Caldwell Dominion headquarters, an emergency meeting was called. The global operations director was visibly sweating. We can't function anymore. The logistics coordination software inventory, tracking data security for the entire supply chain. Neurontech controls all of it. Brayden Caldwell slammed the table. Why wasn't I told Neurontech was at risk of acquisition? No one answered. No one dared. Meanwhile, in a sealed underground facility of Langford Equity, a covert branch of Malcolm's financial network, Tobias Wynn stood in front of a massive digital dashboard. Market indicators flashed across the screen. The domino's been tipped, Tobias murmured to himself. Now we wait for the chain reaction. The supply chain disruption will ripple through every subsidiary. They'll panic. At 155. And just as predicted, Caldwell Dominion stock began to plummet. Within 48 hours, the company lost over 17% of its market value. Major investors began dumping shares. Media outlets pounced on the story. Financial analyses leaked. The board of directors fractured under the pressure. One faction, led by Richard Morrow, demanded Brayden's immediate removal. Another faction, fiercely loyal, insisted on protecting the founder at all costs. Chaos had begun. Somewhere else in the city of New Avalon, in the quiet of her penthouse apartment, Isla Caldwell stood by the window, looking down at the boulevard below. The evening light streamed across her face, catching in her eyes filled with conflict and growing doubt. A notification chimed, sender unknown message. Your father's confidential files. It's time you knew the truth. Attached was an encrypted link. Isla clicked. The screen opened a data file titled The Caldwell File, Confidential, 1996-2024. She froze inside were things no one had ever told her. Records of small companies once acquired by Caldwell Dominion, all founded by people of color or members of marginalized communities. Documentation of capital choke maneuvers, engineered funding cutoffs that forced startups to sell at a loss, then quietly shut down. A list of whistleblowers, all of whom either disappeared from the industry or became entangled in the staged legal battles. She trembled. It was as if someone had suddenly pulled all the air out of the room. That evening, Isla quietly entered the internal document archive in the lower levels of Caldwell Dominion's headquarters. As Director of Sustainable Development, she had clearance to access the B-level files. But what she was about to uncover wouldn't just change her, it would change everything. There was another file, thicker, its title, Elizabeth Caldwell, Ellison Biotech, Elizabeth, her mother. The woman Isla had always believed died in a car accident, but it wasn't an accident. The documents revealed that her mother had once owned a promising biotech company, but after she refused to merge with Brayden's corporation, the company was hit with investor pullouts, hostile media campaigns, and eventually, bankruptcy. 2 weeks later, Caldwell Dominion acquired all of the company's intellectual property for nearly nothing. Isla couldn't believe it. Her father, the man who had raised her, protected her, was the very person who destroyed her mother's dream in the name of corporate conquest. She collapsed into a chair, the file still trembling in her hands. At the same time, in a secure office outside the city, Malcolm was waiting. The door opened. Isla stepped in. "I read everything," she said, "and I know you were the one who sent those files." Malcolm nodded. He didn't offer an explanation. A moment of silence. Isla placed the folder on the table. "I want to help, not for you, not for revenge, but because I can't go on living if I keep hiding the truth." Malcolm looked at her, his expression calm but deeply thoughtful. "Hunaram, I don't need you to do anything dramatic. I just need you to tell the truth. At the right place, at the right time." The plan was set in motion immediately. Operation Trust. Piece by piece, carefully and strategically, the truth began to emerge in the media. One evidence of falsified sustainability reports at Caldwell Dominion 2. Cut-rate acquisitions of companies founded by minority entrepreneurs. 3 internal agreements that rolled back transparency policies the moment press attention faded. Each piece was like a media bombshell. And with every revelation, the public's trust in Caldwell Dominion crumbled further. Caldwell Dominion's stock went into freefall. Major shareholders began to publicly question the leadership. Some even called for an investigation by the Federal Securities Commission. A major newspaper ran a headline that shook the industry. "Billion-dollar empire, built on the ruins of justice." Brayden Caldwell reacted with fury. "Find out who's leaking the information. Monitor every employee who's ever had contact with Malcolm. If Isla knows anything, keep her away from the press." But it was already too late. Celeste Monroe, despite being cut off and isolated, was still leaking key documents through an encrypted network quietly maintained by Tobias Wynn. Malcolm's campaign was never just about destroying a corporation. It was about redistributing trust, about restoring justice, not just for his father who was deceived and wrongfully imprisoned, but for the hundreds of entrepreneurs crushed by the system Brayden Caldwell had engineered. And Isla, the legal heir to the empire, now stood at the most critical crossroads: protect bloodline or follow conscience. She had made her choice. She fit 48th floor Caldwell Dominion headquarters. A boardroom surrounded by reinforced glass offering a sweeping view of New Avalon. Brayden Caldwell sat at the head of the table, face flushed, eyes burning. Around him, the board members sat in tense silence. No one dared meet his gaze. On the massive screen behind them, Caldwell's stock chart was plummeting. A sharp line slicing through what used to be confidence, now replaced by cold reality. Just a week ago, the price had peaked. Now it had dropped by over 40%. "Who let this happen?" Brayden roared. "Neuratech wasn't even on our risk watch list. How did it get acquired without anyone knowing?" No one spoke, but everyone knew the answer. Malcolm Ainsley. 3 days earlier, a barely noticed news blurb appeared on a minor financial site. Neurotech undergoes silent restructuring, enhancing supply chain autonomy. No one paid attention. No one realized that a chain of shell companies, all quietly controlled by Malcolm, had been buying up Neurotech stock piece by piece until he held 51% voting control. Neurotech, the company responsible for Caldwell Dominion's entire logistics network and AI operations, now belonged to Malcolm Ainsley. And then everything froze. Automated shipping routes came to a halt. Data management systems crashed. Billion-dollar contracts were suspended overnight. That was the first punch. In a luxury apartment overlooking Central Heights, Isla Caldwell stood by the window, her hands trembling, as she flipped through the pages of a thick dossier Malcolm had handed it to her earlier. A dense stack of internal memos, deleted emails, and shady asset transfer contracts, all pointing to one undeniable truth. Her father was at the center of a calculated and systematic web of manipulation and corporate destruction. My father. He destroyed dozens of small businesses, Isla whispered. He forced them into bankruptcy and then swallowed their assets for next to nothing. He killed the dreams of an entire generation of entrepreneurs and used those stolen dreams to build Caldwell Dominion. Malcolm replied, his voice calm but firm. You've seen what I wanted you to see. Now you have to choose blood or conscience. Isla fell silent. In the basement of a building owned by Langston Holdings, Tobias Wynn was orchestrating the next phase of the media strategy. Before him, a series of digital monitors displayed a precisely timed schedule, hour by hour, story by story. We start leaking the documents on manipulated bankruptcies, Tobias instructed. Not all at once, drip feed them. One case, one story, one victim at a time. Let the public see how Brayden's system really works. What about the evidence of the bribed federal judge? One associate asked. Hold it, that's our final blow. That night, the hashtag Brayden Caldwell collapse began trending across social media. A short video went viral. A young entrepreneur breaking down in tears as he recounted how his company was destroyed by Caldwell's financial schemes. An expose from The Guardian revealed a secret contract between Caldwell Dominion and a network of shell companies based in the Cayman Islands. At headquarters, Brayden slammed his fist on the table. Cut all media contact, assemble the legal team. I want to know who is leaking this. But it was too late. A leaked internal HR email exposed a blacklist, a list of employees flagged for lack of loyalty. On that list, Celeste Monroe. Then came the footage. A hacked security camera video hit the internet, showing Brayden berating and demeaning a junior staffer, shattering the polished image he had carefully built through public speeches. Once seen as a tech visionary, Brayden was now the face of hypocrisy. In a quiet cafe on the west side, Isla met with Malcolm again. We can't wait any longer, she said. They're trying to play the victim. If the public doesn't see the full picture now, they'll side with the strongest voice. Malcolm nodded. Then we give them that picture, stroke by stroke. He pulled a USB drive from his coat. On this is a recorded conversation between Brayden and a federal judge from 27 years ago about the case that put my father behind bars. Even justice had a price. If we release this, there's no turning back. Isla gripped the USB tightly. She knew from this moment on her life would never be the same. The next morning in the main boardroom of Caldwell Dominion, the atmosphere was thick with tension. A board member spoke in a hushed tone. I've received word that the SEC has officially launched an investigation, and some of the senior stakeholders have begun offloading shares. Brayden bristled with anger. We still control the majority. This is all fake. They're just hitting us with media manipulation. Richard Thorne, a long-standing member of the board, silently placed a file folder in front of him. It's not just the media, Brayden. This is an internal audit report from our own accounting department. There are at least 3 confirmed indicators of financial misconduct, and the worst part is we can't cover for you anymore. The room fell silent. For the first time, Brayden felt a chill down his spine. At the Langston Holdings headquarters, Tobias and Malcolm stood watching a cascade of breaking news across major financial networks. Caldwell Dominion facing biggest corporate investigation of the decade. Board in turmoil as stock plummets nearly 60%. Langston Holdings founder speaks out. It's time to cleanse the economy of corrupt empires. Malcolm rose from his chair and walked slowly toward the tall glass windows. One more strike, he said quietly, and his empire will fall for good. Tobias turned to him. Are you sure? Malcolm nodded, his voice calm, his eyes sharp as steel. Begin the final phase. Today the fire spreads. New Avalon, 6:42 a.m. A thin layer of fog clung to the glass and steel towers of the financial district. Inside a 49th floor office at Langston Holdings, Malcolm Ainsley stood silently by the window, watching the city prepare to wake. Today was the day it all ended. Tobias Wynn entered, holding a tablet. On the screen, Caldwell Dominion's stock chart bled red, a wound split wide open. They've dropped another 18% in pre-market trading. Credit ratings been downgraded. The media's calling it the Caldwell phenomenon. Malcolm didn't turn around. His voice was soft, but carried the weight of a lifetime of restraint. We begin 8:10 a.m. Caldwell Dominion headquarters. Brayden Caldwell slammed a folder onto the conference table. His face flushed, his eyes wild from sleepless nights and unrelenting fury. Who authorized the sale of Tech Spine to a third party? Who signed off on this? Silence. Everyone stared at the table. At the far end of the room, Isla sat quietly. In her hands, a thick, red-labeled folder. Confidential ethics violation reports. Brayden jabbed a finger in her direction. You knew about this, didn't you? You were in on this. Isla looked up, her gaze colder than the recycled air pumping through the boardroom. No, father. The question isn't whether I knew, it's that everyone should know. She slid the folder across the table toward the board members. Page after page fell open. Evidence of falsified environmental reports, schemes to dismantle minority-led businesses, and the damning email trail of a bribed federal judge from 27 years ago. No one said a word. 9:02 a.m., live broadcast on FBN Financial News. Celeste Monroe appeared on screen, the Caldwell Dominion logo behind her. But today she wasn't there to protect the company. I was the director of communications. I saw everything from the inside. And today I've decided to stop staying silent. She began to read. On March 12, 2019, Caldwell Corporation deliberately forced a Black woman-founded pharmaceutical startup into bankruptcy to seize patent ownership. In August 2021, during an internal strategy session, Brayden Caldwell personally approved a plan to phase out diversity initiatives. The media exploded, social networks lit up in a frenzy. Even the outlets that once turned a blind eye now ran bold headlines. The Caldwell Empire, a perfect fad has fallen. 10:47 a.m. U.S. Department of Justice. An encrypted email arrived in the FBI's internal system, attached a trove of classified documents. Meeting minutes, money laundering transactions, evidence of shell companies funneling money into hidden Cayman accounts. Sender, anonymous. But at the bottom of the message, one line stood out. Investigate him the way he once investigated my father. M.A. 11:32 a.m., Malcolm's office. Tobias Wynn entered, tension written across his face. The FBI just issued a search warrant for Caldwell headquarters. The SEC has opened an insider trading investigation, and the IRS is auditing the last 10 years of tax filings. Malcolm nodded. It's time for Isla to release the final piece. 12:03 p.m., Caldwell Dominion headquarters. In a boardroom now live-streamed to internal networks and watched by millions around the world, Isla Caldwell stepped up to the podium. She wore a sharp black suit, her golden hair neatly tied at the nape of her neck. Before a stunned company and a global audience, she spoke. I am the daughter of Brayden Caldwell. I was raised to believe that my family stood for success, for values, for ethics in business. Sashudo. But today I must face the truth. It was all just a polished veneer covering a rotten system. She raised her hand, and behind her the screen lit up with a scanned email. It was dated 1998, an exchange between Brayden Caldwell and a federal judge, offering financial incentives in return for a favorable trial outcome. With this deal, he destroyed the life of an innocent man, Tobias Ainsley. And now it's his son, Malcolm, who brings the truth full circle. 1:10 p.m., Caldwell Dominion headquarters. Main quarter FBI, SEC, and federal agents strode through the marble-tiled hallway, search warrants in hand, like verdicts made flesh. In his private office, Brayden Caldwell was ordered to surrender all electronic devices and financial records. He resisted. "I'm Caldwell. I have testimonial immunity. I'll sue every one of you." A lead agent stared him down unshaken. "No one is above the law, Mr. Caldwell." 3:00 p.m., Caldwell Dominion boardroom. Not a single board member rose to defend Brayden Caldwell. Richard Ellis, the longest-serving member of the board, slid a thick folder across the table toward him. "We've taken a vote with 10 out of 11 in favor. You are officially removed from your possession." Brayden gripped the armrest of his chair, his face tight, jaw locked. "Who's behind this?" A knock at the door. A figure entered, charcoal suit. Calm demeanor, Malcolm Ainsley. "The truth, Brayden. It's the truth that no longer fears you." 5:45 p.m., a small cafe in Brooklyn. Harper Caldwell, Isla's younger sister, who had once left the company citing a loss of faith, sat in a quiet corner, live streaming from her personal account. She revealed suppressed documents from the Sustainable Development Division, falsified invoices, misused budgets, and dozens of internal environmental violations swept under the rug. As the wind whispered outside and her cappuccino cooled, she spoke softly. "Conscience can be delayed, but it can't be bought forever." 8:00 p.m., Langston Holdings Hall. Malcolm stepped onto the stage. Beside him stood Isla Caldwell, Celeste Monroe, and Tobias Wynn. There were no dazzling lights, only a soft, steady glow, and a silence that waited, not with expectation, but with respect. He began with a quiet, measured voice. 27 years ago, my father was wrongfully convicted. Brayden Caldwell wrote that sentence. With power, money, and lies. I did not reclaim justice with bullets or vengeance. I reclaimed it with the truth, and today truth has prevailed. The applause wasn't thunderous, but firm. Each clap like a chisel carving this moment into the stone of history. Malcolm bowed his head, the Phoenix Protocol complete. New Avalon, 1 month after the fall of Caldwell Dominion. Where one of the most powerful corporations in America once stood, now there is only heavy silence. Empty offices, emails unanswered, logos stripped from building facades. But in the ashes of collapse, something new was beginning to rise. Langston Caldwell Foundation, first morning, Isla. Caldwell stepped into the rooftop conference room, no longer the director of sustainable development, living in her father's shadow, but now the co-founder of a new legacy. As she walked past rows of desks, former Caldwell Dominion employees, those uninvolved in the company's wrongdoings, quietly returned to work, eyes wide with cautious hope. Malcolm Ainsley had proposed a bold solution. The majority of Caldwell Dominion's remaining assets would be reallocated to a nonprofit, the Langston Caldwell Foundation, a union of two legacies once at war. "I'm not keeping the Caldwell name for its reputation," Isla had said. "I'm keeping it to make amends and to show the victims that someone is still taking responsibility." The conference room. Site of the first restructuring session. Celeste Monroe stood at the front outlining the post-crisis communication strategy. Her face now wore a calm resilience, though her eyes still carried traces of the months she had spent watched, isolated, threatened. "We're not just rebuilding a company," she said. "We're rebuilding trust, and trust doesn't come from slogans. It comes from action." The Foundation's first initiative, a scholarship program named after Marcus Chen, the young analyst fired for telling the truth. On every certificate, beneath every diploma, would be engraved one line, "For those who dared." New Avalon City Hall. Community Forum. Malcolm Ainsley arrived without an entourage, no designer suit, just a man weathered by time, his face etched with the weight of many battles. On stage, he didn't speak of victory, he spoke of responsibility. Justice is not about toppling the wicked. Justice is when good people rise and keep building what's right, even when the wounds haven't fully healed. A voice from the crowd called out, "Do you regret it? Everything that happened?" Malcolm paused. "I don't regret dismantling a broken system, But I do regret letting a child grow up with bitterness in their heart. If I could do it again, I wish I had fought sooner. Not out of revenge, but for the sake of life itself. Small meeting room. Tobias Wynn and Malcolm Ainsley. Tobias, after years as the strategist behind the curtain, now stood on the edge of stepping away from the front lines. He handed Malcolm a document, a letter of resignation. You don't need me anymore. Mal, you've got Isla, you've got Celeste, and a new team ready to do what's right. Malcolm looked at his oldest friend, and for a moment a quiet emptiness settled between the two chipped coffee mugs on the table. I don't need you for the job, I need you to remind me where we started, and how hard we bled to get here. Tobias smiled gently. Then I'll stay, but this time I'm choosing the back row. A poor neighborhood, South New Avalon. Harper Caldwell's new office. Harper Caldwell was leading a group of students on a tour through a green startup incubator funded by the Langston Foundation. Each student represented a community once left behind by the old system. She paused before a glass wall where a curated exhibit of declassified Caldwell scandal documents was on display. I didn't put this here to shame my father, she said to the group. I put it here to remind myself if you close your eyes to injustice, you become part of it. Bathed in the soft afternoon light, Harper's face no longer carried the shadow of the Caldwell name. It was the face of someone who had chosen truth over legacy, repentance over retreat. New headquarters, launch of the Phoenix Pathways. Program on a stage together stood Malcolm, Isla, Celeste, and Harper. In the audience, community leaders, returning former employees, skeptics turned allies, and those who had believed from the beginning. Phoenix wasn't just the operation that brought down Caldwell Dominion. Malcolm said, Phoenix is a roadmap, a path to rebuild the trust we lost. The program included a fund for minority-owned business development, the Thomas Ainsley Institute for Business Ethics, a legal center supporting victims of financial system abuse, an independent investigative news outlet led by Celeste dedicated to uncovering unchecked power. One late afternoon, a park bench. Malcolm sat alone on an old stone bench. Isla joined him, handing over 2 cups of herbal tea. Did you ever think we'd get here? She asked. Malcolm smiled, the bitterness long gone from his eyes. I did. I just didn't think I'd live to see it. Isla leaned her head gently on his shoulder. Then from now on, let's live to build the next day. At last, a quiet ceremony. A new sign stood proudly in front of the main headquarters, Langston Caldwell Institute for Ethical Leadership. Bathed in the glow of sunset, the metallic letters shimmered, like hope cast in steel. From a distance, Malcolm Ainsley stood with his hands in the pockets of his coat. A young reporter approached him. Do you have any message for the young people stepping into the world of business today? Malcolm answered without hesitation. Remember, this power is never neutral. You're either using it to protect or you're hurting someone without realizing it. The camera stopped rolling. The reporter nodded and stepped away. But Malcolm remained there a while longer, gazing at the sign, then lifting his eyes toward the sky. And in that moment, there was no hatred, no weight left to carry, only one thing remained: hope. Final chapter, The Legacy of Truth, New Avalon. 6 months later, the autumn sky over New Avalon hung in a soft shade of gray, as if the city was still slowly recovering from the historic collapse of Caldwell Dominion. But today, beneath the fading mist, a quiet ceremony was unfolding. No cameras, no press statements, no headlines. Only those who truly belonged to this moment were present. Hopewell Cemetery, the funeral of Gloria Ainsley. She passed peacefully at the age of 94. The woman who once held her 9-year-old grandson's hand in that unjust courtroom decades ago. The woman who had whispered, "Remember this day, power is never given, it must be taken." Malcolm stood beside the grave. No speech, no tears, but in his eyes, an unfamiliar hollowness, as if the final moment of this long battle wasn't victory, but loss. Isla, Celeste, and Harper stood quietly with him. None of them spoke. They understood some griefs cannot be shared. They can only be carried together. Evening. Langston Institute headquarters. Malcolm sat alone in the boardroom, around him maps of community projects, funding reports, letters of gratitude from those once harmed by Caldwell Dominion. But he wasn't reading them. He was writing a handwritten letter, something he rarely did. If someone were to ask me whether truth truly sets us free, I'm not sure my answer would be yes. Truth frees us from illusion. But sometimes when the illusion collapses, it leaves a void that's hard to fill. I no longer feel anger, but I don't feel peace either. What I feel is necessity, as if all these years, the strategy, the sacrifice, were always leading here. Maybe truth isn't what sets us free. Maybe it's what demands we finally take responsibility for ourselves. He folded the letter, not to send, just to place it gently in a drawer, next to a photograph of Tobias Ainsley, a man never formally exonerated, but now honored, his name etched on the cornerstone of the Langston Institute's Central Hall. 1 month later, at an international business ethics conference, Harper Caldwell stood on stage representing the Langston Caldwell Foundation before a global audience for the first time. I used to believe that truth would make things easier, but I was wrong. Truth doesn't comfort, it demands. It demands change, confrontation, action, redemption, even when no one asks that of you. She paused, her eyes finding the front row where Malcolm, Isla, and Celeste sat quietly. And that's what makes truth the most valuable thing a person can hold. Not because it brings peace, but because it makes you real. Late afternoon, Isla Caldwell and Celeste Monroe stood on the rooftop of the newly inaugurated research center. "Do you think he's happy?" Isla asked, watching Malcolm below speaking to a group of students. Celeste paused, then said softly, "I think he feels like he's where he's meant to be. And sometimes that's all the happiness someone who's lost everything can hope for." Isla smiled faintly. "I used to wonder why he didn't look satisfied when my father was arrested. Now I understand he didn't win. He just chose not to remain a victim." That evening, Malcolm returned home. A modest apartment in North New Avalon. No mahogany offices, no motorcade, just him, a cup of warm tea, and an unfinished journal. A message pinged Isla. "Are you free tomorrow? We're hosting our first youth talk with high schoolers. The topic is, what do you do when the truth isn't welcome?" Malcolm read it, then slowly typed back, "I'll be there, and I'll bring a few scars to help tell the story." The next morning, a suburban boarding school auditorium, students filed into the small auditorium, unaware that the silver-haired man in the front row had once shaken the pillars of an empire. Malcolm stepped up to the podium. No slides, no script. "I'm not here to teach you a moral, I'm here to tell you a story. A story that began with a handshake refused, and ends with you asking yourself, after everything, did I live true?" A student raised his hand. "If you could start over, what would you do differently?" Malcolm paused, then smiled softly. "I'd choose to believe in the truth a little sooner." New Avalon, 1 year later. A new sign stood outside the gates of the Langston Caldwell Center, "For a world that doesn't need heroes to rise, but where truth is strong enough never to be buried." Isla, Celeste, and Harper stepped out of the glass building, sunlight catching their faces, not as inheritors of a fallen empire, but as architects of something reborn. Across the park, Malcolm sat on a bench reading a freshly published book, his own. The title, "Truth Doesn't Free Us from the World. It Frees Us from Ourselves." A young woman passed by, recognized him, and paused shyly. "Excuse me, are you the man who brought down Caldwell Dominion?" Malcolm smiled. "No, you've got the wrong guy. I'm just the one who didn't accept a refused handshake," as the end of the story.